Hello, everybody. Just here for me a long-awaited deck tech for probably going to be my main deck through the next several months. Nico Robin. So starting off, we'll go over her leader ability. She is a 5k power 4 life leader, yellow purple, with the abilities of banish. And what banish does is whenever you hit life with this leader, they do not get any triggers. The card goes straight to the trash. This can make a really big effect at punishing or really putting pressure on the opponent's hand. And that's going to be real important going into the game. You'll play a lot like the green-yellow Yamato will, where there'll be a lot of turns where you will just invest on into swinging with your leader to really exert your hand pressure. And one of the things that you can always do, even small swings with your leader, can exert an escalating amount of pressure as their hand gets lower and lower and lower. So that real important part of the thing. The other half of the leader's ability is when attacking, you may trash a card with a trigger from your hand, then add up to one Dawn card from your Dawn deck and rest it. So this ends up playing in pretty nicely with her first ability. While you're exerting hand pressure on them, you invest a little bit of your hand to kind of accelerate you into the end game. And if your opponent is stuck taking too much hand pressure, then they might not have enough kind of staying power to get to remove your top end, which is what you're bringing out a little early. So there's kind of the two pretty synergistic effects on this leader, and they make up for a really nice package. I've been waiting for this leader since really the beginning of the game. Robin's my favorite character from the anime, and I was super hyped when they announced that OP04 was going to be Alabasta focused, because I'm like, oh, they already have two crocodile leaders. The next in line to get a Baroque Works leader, it makes sense for it to be Miss Nico Robin here, and she would have probably been portrayed as Miss All Sunday. We didn't get it then, but now we're getting back to the same color pair as that crocodile did in OP04, but this time without this Baroque Works typing. So it makes for a much more interesting kind of angle than I think it could have been if they'd given her Baroque Works. I think in hindsight, while I was disappointed that she wasn't Baroque Works, I do think that it's better for her and having a unique identity to not be Baroque Works, and it lets Crocodile have his own space. So next we'll get into the deck list. I want to start with our top end, starting with four of Yamato. This is pretty unambiguously your best top end option for the deck. One of the things that kind of naturally happens when you're playing with a banished leader is your opponents will more aggressively protect their life, because if they take the banish hit, they don't get that life, and then they're losing out on both hand size from not getting it into their hand, and you're exerting life pressure. So one of the things that naturally happens is they will stay at higher life. So then what Yamato does is, on play, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the total of your and your opponent's life cards. Then if you have one or less life cards, add up to one card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. So pretty much every bit of text on this card is great for this deck. You'll find often that you will be running into about 1 to 2 life at the time that you hit 9 Dawn because of your ramp ability, and your opponents will probably be at 3 to 5 life even, potentially. So this KO effect usually can hit anything from like a 3 up to like a 6-ish power. And that's right about what they've been doing up into that point. So this on curve will probably KO whatever they just played potentially heal you for a life, and it represents a 9k body on board, which is perfect for that point of the game, especially because of the banish pressure. Your 9k base is going to be really effective in removing board from that point on, or taking life at that point. So definitely, if there's a single card that when I've lost a game I feel like I wish I had seen more of, it's almost always Yamato. There's one other card of the deck that we're saving for the very end, but Yamato, far and away the best top end option for this deck. Next thing we're going to go into is what I think is the second best option for the deck. I'm only running 2 of them because I haven't opened an additional 2. I would be running 4 of this in kind of a finalized list. But is this 9-cost Monkey D. Luffy. His on play is you may return 1 or more Dawn cards from your field to the Dawn deck. Then draw 1 card, and this character gains Rush during this turn. So this replacing itself so you don't lose hand, which can be really important because your hand will get kind of low with Nico Robin. And then having Rush, you can really exert some pressure on their board. Sometimes their life will be low enough to where you can really push on life. This is a really good last card of the game to play after you've invested a little bit in swinging with their leader, eating up the last bit of counter. This can really swing through. If they're at 0 life and just a bunch of cards in hand, this will oftentimes get you there. So I would put this at the next best top end card. The next one I have here, 2 of the Linn. She is kind of a midpoint a little bit between Yamato and Luffy. She always has the heal, so I'll going through her ability. On play, Dawn -1, you may trash a card from your hand, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards, then add up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 6 or less to the top or bottom of your opponent's life face up. So this one can act as a little bit of removal like Yamato does, a little bit of heal like Yamato does, but it does so at the cost of a -1 Dawn and trashing a card from your hand, which, while she always can hit the 6, will sometimes not be relevant. There are oftentimes you'll be removing a 4-cost or something like that. And so that added bonus doesn't bear out all the time. The trashing a card is also a pretty big cost in this deck because you're discarding to ramp to get there. There will be a lot of times where if this is your first top end card, dropping another card may put you in a kind of precarious spot to where your opponent can swing back at you and kind of really hurt on your life in a way that Yamato or Luffy might not. And so I think it's probably a little bit below Luffy. When I eventually get my Luffys, I will replace them. But it is definitely a card that has a niche in the deck, and is 100% a defensible option. Some people prefer it and they like to play a different, slightly different game plan than I do. But it's just not my preference. Last card for the top end, we're running 2 of Katakuri. I like Katakuri quite a bit. I think if he had a little bit more, so I'm just going through his on play, I guess. On play, add up to 1 character with a cost of 8 or less to the top or bottom of the owner's life cards face up. So that has a lot of modes you can use on it. You can use it to put one of your opponent's guys in life. You can use it to put one of your guys in life. And those 2 options are both very useful in the deck. Healing can be really important as a Forlife Leader to kind of prolong the game just long enough. And then putting one of their key cards, especially if they've invested a whole bunch of Dawn into it, like something like an 8-cost kid, or maybe a 7-cost kid who's threatening to give a leader plus 1k for the rest of the game. Those are both really good targets to hit with Katakuri in a way that doesn't interact with KO, so all of the KO protection abilities don't work on it. So definitely very key in very specific matchups, and it being an 8-cost instead of the 9-cost is often quite relevant. And I'll get into some other cards later on that synergize specifically with Katakuri that don't synergize so much with the other cards in the top end. So definitely a meaningful card to consider. I like it at 2. I would consider going up to 3 and then 3 Luffy, but I don't think I would ever go above 3 for Katakuri. So that is our top end. Let me clear this off and we'll bring them back cards for props when necessary. Next, moving into the mid game for this leader, there are a couple different categories. The first one we're going to do is removal. So starting off, we have 2 Onami. This one kind of plays a couple different roles in the deck. Its most common mode, though, is it is a trigger card that can be discarded to leader, and it has a great trigger on its own. So going through its on play, up to one of your leader or character cards gain banished during this turn. That does seem kind of redundant with Robin, but most often if you're ever using that mode, it's going to be on something like a Yamato to really get you out of some hairy endgame situations where you really need to finish out the game for them not to get the life, because that might give them enough trigger or enough counter to survive. So there'll definitely be points in the game where this does come up, but it is infrequent enough that you don't want too many options or too many copies of it. Its trigger, on the other hand, is something that pretty much every time it comes up is great. So its trigger is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Perfect trigger for the deck. And in the niche situations where you do get to play it to give banish, it can be really useful. But a lot of times it's just fodder for Nico Robin, or you're hoping for it to come up in your life. The one exception to that point, and where it's sometimes the best, is with Katakuri. So if you're on Tendon and you have, maybe this is your second top end turn, you were at 9 the previous turn, played a Yamato or something like that, you can play out Onami, give Yamato banish, swing with Yamato, and then play out Katakuri to put Nami into your life, which is 100% like perfect for a lot of decks. Because then when they go to swing into you, you get to eat up a piece of their board, and you've gained that life. It was essentially free. And Katakuri in that mode can be both removal and healing, which is the whole reason why he's not as strong as Yamato's, because he doesn't get to do that all the time. But when you do have Onami, perfect play to do. And anytime you have the option of, or even have a think that might be relevant, it is useful. Also relevant, you can play it out on an earlier turn and then Katakuri it later. If you have a Katakuri in hand but you don't have time to play it, you can always try to play out an Onami early on maybe a turn where you don't have another good play, swing with some of your board, and then with leader, put a lot of hand pressure, and then Katakuri it later. Next card in the removal category we have is another Nami. This one is the Egghead Nami from OP09. This one I would consider probably core part of the deck. The on play, you may trash a card with trigger, which you should have a lot of from your leader, but you may trash a card with trigger from your hand, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. Then if you have 3 or less cards in your hand, draw 1 card. So all of the modes on this come up often on that on play, and then its trigger is activate this card's on play. So when you trigger it, you won't get the body as well, but when you but you're still getting the removal, and then obviously playing it, you get both a 5k body and you get to remove one of their 5 cost bodies. So this is a stellar card, probably one of the core pieces of the deck. It comes up in game when you need to remove that last blocker. It comes up mid game when you're trying to make sure you stay stable against like a Doflamingo. It's good in a lot of different parts of the game, and it has a trigger, so it's always something you can pitch to leader ability. One of the things I want to call out specifically is if you are going first into a deck like a Doflamingo or another deck that really likes playing something good on their Fordon that you're really interested in removing. So it could be something Doflamingo being one of the main ones, or if you are against maybe a Bonnie, or a Shanks with Lucky Roo or something like that. One of the things you can do, going first, your first turn, you just pass. Second turn, swing 8 with lead, discard a card. On their Fordon turn, when they swing at you, you counter out. And between the discard to leader ability and the discard to Nami's ability, after countering out, you will have exactly that 3 cards you need, and you get to draw a card, which can be really relevant, because you essentially are getting a 5k body with a KO with no downside in those situations. You do have to be careful about overplaying into that thing, because your hand after it is stuck at just that 3 cards, 3 or 4 cards, which can put you in a kind of precarious position, because at that point you only have leader and a 5k body. So you don't have the healthiest board, but it is real nice to be able to run that into like a Doflamingo or something like that, to keep them off so that you can survive until the late game. Also relevant with Katakuri. Katakuri's ability is going to come up a lot in here. But unfortunately, because these bodies don't stick very often, Katakuri, putting them in life is sometimes a stretch. So just something to keep in mind with all these trigger bodies, but not something that will always work out for you. Next card that I'm going to go over, we have 2 of the Egghead Luffy. So Luffy's in a lot of ways similar to Nami, and let's keep Nami out here. She's a lot of ways similar. His ability is activate main. You may trash this character if you have 2 or less life cards, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, then draw a card. So a lot of the same text on these. The important difference is that his ability is gated behind you being at 2 or less life, which doesn't always happen. It's probably a healthy place to stay at with Robin, is that 2 life threshold. But there are definitely times, especially early game, where you won't be able to leverage it. It is a fine card to play out early, swing with it in a future turn, and then KO or trash itself to KO a body. But a lot less usable and a lot less playing aroundable than Nami. And then additionally, it has a trigger, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. 4 is usually enough to hit most of the targets you want. There are a couple that escape it, and that's part of the reason why we're running Nami as our main removal, and Luffy being just kind of a backup. That is it for Luffy. Moving into our next card, and this is going to be one of the more interesting ones that probably people may not have seen, or at least not recently. This is Bracho Bomber. It is from ST04, so it's older than OP09 itself. And this card, 6 cost, main, KO one of your opponent's characters at a cost of 6 or less, then add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. So the most important piece on this card is definitely the removal bit, but that adding an extra Dawn and setting it active can be super relevant in the game, because one of the downsides to Robin's ramp ability is it's hurting your hand. And if you aren't trying to push all the way to 10, this is the kind of card that curves into 9 perfectly, while giving you one, essentially preserving 1 card in your hand, because you don't have to use leader ability on the turn you play Bracho Bomber, and you will still get to 9 on the following turn for your top end. It also has a trigger. Add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as active. This can be relevant late game. There we will go over some of the events later where that 1 extra Dawn at the end can be relevant. And then in spots where it's not relevant, you can always just pitch it to leader ability, and instead of investing the 6 Dawn into it, you just put the 6 Dawn on lead and swing big and eat one of their life. So it's got a lot of flexibility. It's only run into 2 of because it doesn't have counter, which is one of the things that you'll notice about a lot of the 2 ofs and such, is that the cards that don't have counter, you can't afford to run full play sets of them. Final card in the removal category is Kingdom Come. This is really important when you're facing some of the real big top end cards of the format. Cards like 10 cost Shanks, 10 cost Blackbeard, 8 cost Kid, any of the other opposing 9 drops. This is just a great card for just clearing those out. And oftentimes, the times when you have the need to play it, because you're a Forlife Leader, you will already be at the 1 life. So it is, in a lot of ways, relatively cheap. You just pay the 6 because you don't need to worry about the rest of it. Just to clarify what it does fully, though, it's main, KO up to one of your opponent's characters, end of story, then trash cards from the top of your life until you have 1. So a lot of times you will only be at 1 life when you need to use this. This is great for clearing out blockers at the end of the game. It's great for clearing out big top end cards, particularly Blackbeard, because it doesn't have any on plays or anything like that. It's coming from an event. You don't have to worry about it getting turned off by his ability. And if they are relying on that Blackbeard to protect themselves, just clearing it for 6 and then swinging the rest on lead is a great thing to do. It also has a trigger, so it's trashable to Robin's ability, and it not as often, but does sometimes come up. Its trigger is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the total of your and your opponent's life cards. So it's similar to Yamato's effect. Especially at the points when you are really wanting that KO out of life and not the Kingdom Come. There are a lot of times where your opponent and you will both be kind of low on life, so it may not get where you need it to in the later game, which is where the trigger is often relevant. But still a great card and super important at clearing out those cards that are otherwise quite difficult for this deck to deal with. Moving on to the next category of card, we have our draw cards. Starting off, we have 2 of Lucy, and because this isn't a super common card, I'll go through the effect first. It's a 6 cost, 7k power. When attacking once per turn, you may add 1 card from the top or bottom of your life cards to your hand. You may rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. Then, if you have 1 or less life cards, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life cards. So 6 cost is a perfect cost to curve into going first. You'll be at 1 Dawn, then 3 Dawn, then 6 Dawn. And that perfect spot on it, oftentimes when it comes down, it is really hard for your opponents to answer. It is just a little bit too costly and a little bit too much power for most decks to deal with, and without investing a whole lot into it. So it comes down, usually is going to stick for a turn, and usually you will drop to 2 life right on time. So that when on the following turn you go to swing with it, you take 1 life, rest one of their 4s, which you can then swing at with your leader, and then heal because you will be at just one left. So effectively it draws you a card every time it attacks from that point on in the game. Being a 7k body, after you've attacked with it, they have to invest quite a bit to get it off. And in the deck where your hand is sometimes a little cramped, this can be having that extra power and not needing to invest as much to protect it can be really relevant. This is the kind of card that is really key against Blackbeard if you can find it, because it is real hard for them to out it. They have to invest a lot of resources to get its cost low enough to KO it. And it doesn't have on plays. 7k body is hard for them to swing into a lot of times. It's kind of really hard for them to deal with, and one of the ways that Blackbeard can get in front of you is if they get their Burgesses down and they can really drain your hand with Burgess and going into Blackbeard's. He can help solve that by just drawing a card every time he attacks. So really, really important card for that matchup, and can be really good into Doflamingo because almost their entire deck is 4 cost or less. So you get a lot of pressure on the board that it can sometimes be the way that Doflamingo can get out in front of you is by staying wide and not tapping their bodies right away. Next card in the draw category is Jewelry Bonnie. Got 4 of these. So one of the things you'll notice on a lot of the cards is the triggers are important. So I'll starting there. Her trigger is draw 2 cards, trash 1 card from your hand. The deck does run quite a bit of top end. Not an obscene amount, but there are a lot of times where you need don't need the 3rd top end card, but you need a 2K. And so this trigger here can really help cycle out some of your unnecessary top end. Between life pressure and a couple big bodies, you can usually close out the game. So the 4th and 5th top end might not be necessary, and that trigger can really help. Also relevant on her is her ability, Dom times 1, your turn, once per turn. When a card is removed from your opponent's life cards, draw 2 cards and trash 1 card from your hand. This one can be real relevant at the end of the game. So you find yourself at a spot where you are you've already gotten down to your first couple top end cards, and you find that, oh, I ran out of top end cards. So you have to spend a turn investing in attacking and finding other defensive options. So what you can do is play down Bonnie, put 1 Dawn on her, and then start swinging with your top end cards at life, probably after swinging with your leader, because if you can get off the 5k advantage, that's optimal. And then getting that extra draw 2 trash 1 can really help you dig into defensive options that may be what you need to kind of like extend out past the end of your top end. So yeah, very relevant. There's no on play on it, so it can't get negated very nicely by Blackbeard's Black Hole ability. And it does have a body that does come into attacking. You're not often going to want to attack with it early, because if it can stick around for more than 1 turn and get activations on more than 1 turn, it can be really strong. But it is relevant that you can get in for attacks. So definitely a card to consider. The next card, and the last card in kind of our mid-game, is the Nico Robin character. I'm only running 3. I found that there's a lot of times where it doesn't quite line up, even though it fits really well with the leader ability. It's kind of in an awkward spot where it doesn't do the roles that you want it to a lot of the time. But getting into what it does, it is a 6 cost 6,000 power character, so not great on rate for that, but its on play is if your opponent has 3 or more life cards, trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. Just straight up, it's like a rush banish card that can't be blocked or anything like that, but it's only active if your opponent has 3 or more life cards. And that can be really relevant. There's a lot of times where you've gotten your opponent earlier, or you draw it late, and then it's not as relevant. But one of the things that it does have, that's part of the reason it's definitely still a great card in the deck, is its trigger. So play 1 card, play up to 1 yellow character card with a cost of 3 or less from your hand. This can be relevant if you need to get out of Bonnie, or if you are setting up an Onami for a future turn with Katakuri, or some of the next cards we'll go over will be relevant for it as well. So that trigger, while it doesn't necessarily seem super relevant, there are a lot of cards that synergize with it, and it can really put your opponent in a bad spot when you do hit it at a trigger. And then finally, just same as all of our trigger cards, in the worst case, it's got both counter and it can be trashed to leader ability, which is always a good place to be with this deck. All right, going into our last category of cards, we have our defensive cards. So the first card to go over is Shiroshi. She is a 2 cost, 0 power body, 1k counter. It's got blocker, but also it has, when this character is KO'd by your opponent's effect, add up to 1 card from the top of your deck to the top of your life. So this is a card that really forces black decks in particular to play fair with your blockers. One of the things that happens in almost every other deck is you'll play out a blocker, black will just clear it with the second KO on a Lucci, or just for free off of some other, like a swing off of Brook or something like that. So this is just a card that doesn't let them do that. they have to play into it like a regular blocker, so you'll get full value when you want to go block a Moria or something like that. The other big upside with this one is it only costs 2, so it fits in. You can have a Katakuri turn where you play Shiroshi, you play Katakuri, put a different card in life, and you effectively gained 2 extra hits worth of staying power, which can be real relevant. Only running it at a 3 right now. I think between 3 and 4 is great. It's just got hits all the right numbers for a kind of defensive card, and having that extra upside against black decks is real nice. The next 3 cards are going to be our 2Ks. So we have 4 of Nico Olia, 4 of Frankie, and 4 of Capone Gang Beige. So I'll go over these kind of quickly. Maybe we'll go over Veggie for anyone who's been playing for any amount of time. This is a classic yellow 2K counter. His trigger, great for discarding to Robin sometimes, but trigger up to one of your opponent's leader or characters cannot attack this turn. So many times when he comes up and trigger, it is just a I don't lose this turn because your opponent needed that extra swing and they don't have it. Super relevant. You'll never play the card out. If you ever find yourself in a spot where you need to, there is the Robin trigger to play out Veggie to, on the following turn, Katakuri it, but that's super niche. That will come up in maybe 1% of the games, but something to remember if you need it. Next one, Frankie. Frankie, similar to Veggie, when he comes up near the end of the game, it can be really relevant, but on the opposite side. Rather than it being a really strong defensive trigger, it's a more offensive trigger. Getting an extra body, and let me read, I guess, his trigger first. His trigger is draw 1 card. Then, if you have one or less life cards, play this card. So, if he's your second or second to last or your last life, you get a free body that will replace itself out of your with a card draw. This can be super relevant when you need to push for game on the following turn. That 1 extra attacker may be everything you need to get there. The majority of the time, though, he's just a 2K. I think if I am playing the game and I do not have one of my other trigger cards, and I just have 2Ks, going into prioritizing leader ability, I would discard Veggie first, then a Frankie, then Olia, who we'll get to in a sec. Moving on to, this is definitely your best 2K. Because you're not running any searchers, it doesn't matter your types or anything. A lot of your 2Ks are just what is the best value. And Olia takes it bar none versus the other 2. Her trigger, if your leader is Nico Robin, draw 3 cards, trash 2 cards. So it's a +1 trigger. You trade essentially this 2K for some card fixing, which can be really relevant. Like I was saying with Bonning's trigger, sometimes you just have too much top end and you need to get rid of a couple, or you have an extra Bracho Bomber or other no counter card that's a little outside of their optimal range for playing it. Exactly the kind of trigger you want. But this 2K, differently than our other 2Ks, has an on-play that is actually relevant. So her on-play is up to 1 of your Nico Robin leader. So you're the only deck in the game who can run the on-play. Gains 3,000 power during this turn. That is can be really relevant in the end of the game. Your opponent has mathed out what they think you can do on their board. You play a Nico Olia for 1, get 3K power worth out of it. So it's an extra 2K power that your opponents really can't plan around. One of the big things that you can do with Olia is she is castable in the same turn with your Katakuri. So you can play Olia, give it your leader, swing, play Katakuri, put her in life, use it for filtering. Great interaction, and especially with our last card, it's super relevant that she's only 1 and not 2, because then a 2 Ghost would also work with that Katakuri line. And that will bring us to our last card, and potentially and arguably the strongest card in the deck. We have Gumgum Giant. Gumgum Giant is single-handedly, I think, the one card that makes almost all of the purple leaders that we see in the meta viable. And it specifies that all of the purple leaders in the meta should be Straw Hat type, which Nico Robin is one. This is actually one of the things that I didn't think about as much early, because this feels like a relatively innocuous card. But if she had the Baroque Perks type and not the Straw Hat type, she would not have been able to run this, and then instead had to run Okama. There's a definite argument about which one is stronger, but I think that Gumgum Giant is easily one of the strongest cards in purple, and even potentially the game for its cost. Like I was saying with Yamato, the games that I lose, I'm either missing, I wish I had drawn more Yamatos, or I wish that I'd drawn more Gumgum Giants. Almost no other card can fit the role that those two do. So finally getting into the card, we have 1 cost, counter, Dawn -2. You may trash a card from your hand if your leader has a Straw Hat Crew type. Up to one of your leader or characters gains plus 1,000 power during this battle, then draw 2 cards. That last bit, so much stronger than any other counter event. The ability to counter for 4K at no cost to your hand size, immensely strong. And a lot of times the card you'll be pitching has 0 counter. The 2 cards you draw potentially have more. So this 4K is deceptive because it may be even more from the cards that you draw out of it. Easily, and this card alone being 1 cost is the whole reason why we run 0 10-drop events or 10-drop characters. It is so strong to be able to play a 9-drop and hold up 1 for Gumgum Giant that it is unambiguously, it warps the rest of the deck because of it. Easily strongest card, well, potentially strongest card in the deck. And that's why I was calling out the Olia line, because 8, 1, and 1 up for a giant. Super good. This can be relevant with the trigger on Bracho Bomber. That's one of the reasons you'll have to pay attention to Bracho Bomber. If you see it in trigger, oftentimes it's not relevant because you'll already be at 10. But there are a couple times where you will do a Dawn minus off of, say, a Luffy or a Charlotte Linn, and then if you hit the Bracho Bomber trigger, getting that Dawn back that you Dawn minused off of one of those, and it coming back active means that you can use another Gumgum Giant sometimes. Hard to speak about this too much more because it does near about everything, and even that feels sometimes like it is underestimating the card. So kind of final thoughts on the deck, and I'll insert in here a picture of the full deck list. This deck, I think, while probably not slept on, is really strong in a way that really tests the opponent's ability to kind of map out the way the game goes. Banish on the leader really adjusts the way that people have to play the game, because they can't rely on their hand and they can't rely on their life to get more cards in hand for defense. And that dynamic can really put a lot of mental load on your opponent and make them slip up elsewhere. Because if you just swing a 5, oh, it's just a 1k counter. I need to do it because it's Banish, but I'll just pitch a 1k counter. And then that 1k counter that they use to protect their life from Banish comes up later because now they can't use that same 1k counter to protect their board. So I think that this is one that is a little bit of a skill gap leader. Not quite like an NL or Onami, where it completely shifts your game plan, but really putting the pressure, putting the screws on your opponent in a way that is pretty unique and pretty fun. It's nice that her abilities synergize, but not in a way that's like overly prescriptive. One of the things that I definitely like about the deck is that even though it doesn't have a good single package that goes with it, there are a couple options, but none of them quite hit as well as some of the other leaders that would fit. Like you could consider running the Purple Straw Hats package, but your ramp coming in rested puts you pretty significantly back off of doing the kind of broken things that Purple Luffy does. You could run Big Mom Pirates, but then there's a question of why aren't you running Pudding as your leader? And then you could run 10 cost Big Mom, the yellow Big Mom. There's just a bunch of like little things where it's like, oh, why wouldn't you just run this other leader in those things? Robin has the advantage that she has a unique ability that kind of justifies itself, and then you have to pick and choose from the different packages to find the right mix. I feel like this is a deck that could really benefit from some really fine tuning. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do with it for 09. One of my goals is to, in the next couple months, practice up and go into the treasure cups. I got into all 4 in February, and I want to see just how high I can push the deck. So I guess that kind of wraps up what I wanted to say. I will say, if you are interested in more Robin content, I'm going to be playing this deck almost exclusively for OP09. So there's going to be a lot of videos on my channel that are focused around Robin. I will probably do some extra deck techs as I learn new things, do some little shorter videos on tech cards that you could run, and maybe matchups. So if you're interested in getting more content on this, I think, rather unique and interesting leader, please like, comment, subscribe, especially if you've got things that you want to see in the future from this leader. Let me know. I'm looking forward to trying to kind of really push this leader as far as it can go. So signing off for now, and see you guys in my next video.